podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. Full house today. I've got George Bellshaw, our tennis writer and broadcaster, and of course our tennis coach, who is Calvin Betton, live from Eastbourne, the glamorous South Coast venue for this week's ATP stop. Calvin, I assume you've been going to Eastbourne on and off for a number of years. Does it get any better?
It's only the second time I've been, actually. I came last year, and I didn't come the year before because it was the weird COVID bubble year where, by all accounts, the hotel was in a bubble. The hotel was a bubble, but you just walked to the grounds when you came out there. So,
yes.
Yeah. And it's funny because people are still talking about that now. It's funny how 2 years on, some of the stuff that we went through was absolutely effing crazy, wasn't it? But,
it's quite weird to look back on.
But yeah, no, it's just my second time here. It's still, I mean, you hear all the time that the players, like, the foreign players tend to be a bit freaked out by Eastbourne because they look at it on a map and they think it's basically London, and then they come for the first time and it's this strange seaside town that's just, the average age of the people here is quite high, to say the least, and there's loads of seagulls just flying around all the time. And it's windy, and it's not, it's not Soho for the people who are thinking it's going to be in central London, is it?
Right. I like the idea of, I'm just looking at the draw, someone like Marc-Andrea Huesler, who's potentially never been there before, turning up and just thinking, where on earth have I landed myself? But
yeah, I mean, it's just very, very. We were on the practice court today, and it's it's scenic, and there's some lovely old buildings here, but the backdrop for the practice court, and I said to Barry, who's Julian's coach, that like this could only be in England. It's probably the most English of tournaments.
Now, I have actually had a few questions, Calvin, from people wondering why you're working with Johnson and Cash this week rather than Patton and Cash. I know Henry's been through the ringer a bit. I don't know how much you're able to or want to tell us, but obviously Henry's not playing this week.
No, Henry's injured. He'll be out for the grass court tournaments. Nothing too serious. Just got a bit of a problem with his back, and for longevity reasons, it was best that he missed the grass season after Surbiton and got himself fit. And he will hopefully, touch wood, be back for the US hardcourt season or the second half of the US hardcourt season. So, and because I coach Luke and Henry, and then obviously through that I coached Julian as well, kind of, that once Henry pulled out, the obvious person to come in for Jules for the grass courts was Luke.
Yes, slotted right in. Seemed like an easy fit. George, you're not, I mean, actually, for once you might be the least injured. If we count Calvin's players as like a sort of extension of him, I've broken my finger playing cricket, very ill-advisedly. Have you got any serious injuries at the moment?
So, my
Great.
knee had a bit of a setback. So I managed to get back. I got back for my football 7-a-side team for the last 6 weeks of their season, where I ended as top scorer after playing 6 matches. Just to say, we won the league,
living up to the name on your back, I believe.
The Drog, yeah, Didier. Actually, rather humorously, I won't dwell too long on my footballing career, but there was one week where there were a couple of lads who were just like watching on the sidelines and were getting very kind of enthused by my performance. And I scored a couple of good goals. I think they basically looked at me before the game and thought I'd be absolutely dreadful. I'm not saying I'm amazing, but I had a good game and they were going mad. And anyway, I'm coming off feeling pretty confident, walking past them, thinking, I am the freaking Drog. Good times, good times. And then they go, you remind us just of Wout Weghorst. And I was like, wow. There goes my...
not a compliment.
Not the Premier League striker I thought I was.
It occurs to me that Calvin may not be aware of George's famous tattoo.
I've not, no.
George has something that he's quite proud of, but I think should be one of the more embarrassing things about his life. Tattoo of Didier Drogba. Is it Didier Drogba or is it just the Drog?
It's just the Drog. So I can't believe I'm telling this, broadcasting this to our listeners, but now we've started. Yeah, again, I think I was like 17 or something, and I'd scored a hat-trick at this kind of men's league game I was playing in. And I was going on a night out, naughtily underage in Birmingham, and I turned up being a cocky little shit I was, and saying, yeah, I was fucking brilliant tonight. I banged in 3 goals. They were very good, to be fair. I still remember them now, because it was one of those games that was just very good. Anyway, they all then started mocking me, being like, oh, you think you're the freaking the Drog. And I was like, yes, I am. And then a few years later, wisely at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got the Drog tattooed on my back, which has proved a source of amusement since. And final little epilogue for this story. I once went to go and meet Didier Drogba at a book signing, because I had the day off. And I went to see it, and he was not paying much attention to people. He was sort of just signing them. You know, he's got huge queues in Canary Wharf or wherever it was. So I'm thinking, I need to say something interesting to him to kind of catch his attention here. I didn't get my tattoo out, but I said to him, all my mates call me the Drog. I think it's because we look so alike. And he looks up at me, bursts out laughing, gives me a kind of massive high five, and then he's written in the book, to the Drog, from himself, which is quite nice.
That might even be better than Tattoo Story, quite frankly. But maybe when we do Tennis Unfiltered live, you can get your tattoo out for the lads. That'll be the highlight of the show.
That's all the incentive I need to get on a diet then. Get my back out.
Right, well, we said before the show that actually there's quite a lot of good tennis to talk about, and we spent 10 minutes talking about George's football career. But anyway, let's move on as swiftly as time will allow us. We're talking on Sunday evening, so the Queen's final has just finished. I missed, well, I should of course have been courtside watching, and instead I missed quite a lot of it because I was in A&E getting my finger sorted. But I was able to, through the wonders of modern technology, stream it on my phone. So it wasn't quite the same, but still interesting nevertheless. Good to have a different perspective on things. Before we talk about tennis, though, I do have to do something that I always say I should do, or will do, which is always read out 5-star reviews. And we've had 2 of them from the United States of America. We have indeed. One entitled Fast Becoming My Fave. Smurfy says, I wait impatiently from the end of the Just Played edition for the next one. I think Calvin is my favourite of all podcasters, and probably because he's a coach and not a podcaster, can give perspective on topics in a way most can't. His blunt honesty and endearing accent, crikey, it's amazing how far the Yorkshire accent goes in America, is refreshing and, yes, unfiltered. Keep it going. I love the enhanced long episodes and listen to every minute. Can't wait till next week. Thanks, Smurfy. And Mini Tennis says, red, white and green. Interesting as always. I was laughing out loud on my walk when I heard the whole bit about the red, white and green flag. Just hoping no one saw me. I have 2 contenders for you, Matteo Arnaldi and Andrea Vavasori, but I'm guessing that may not jog Calvin's memory. Enjoy the trip to Paris. That one is a little dated, and I apologise for not picking it up earlier. There is one other.
It was neither of those. I know both of those players, and I know it was definitely neither of those.
Okay.
the mystery continues.
Excellent stuff. Right, we shall move on then to some actual tennis. Remember, if you haven't left us a rating or a review yet, please do. Some people think we're biased, some people don't. Some of the people who think we're biased like leaving reviews saying we're biased. So if you could please counter that bias by, well, you can say you're biased if you want, but put 5 stars anyway. Right, we'll start off with Queens, where Carlos Alcaraz beat Alex De Minaur 6-4, 6-4 in 96 minutes, which was a relief to almost everyone who might have been fearing that their last match was in for a repeat. They played in Barcelona last year, and it lasted 3 hours 40, which is probably a reflection of what happens when you get 2 very fit and fast players on a very slow surface. But there was none of that this time, just the 2 breaks of serve in the whole match. at pretty key moments for Alcaraz. His first ever grass court title. Where do we sit on this? I mean, he had a good run. He beat Sebastian Korda, he beat Grigor Dimitrov, Yuri Lehechka. George, I know you watched most of this match. I mean, you texted us both and said Alcaraz looks like he's learnt to play on grass.
Yeah, I thought he played really well. I thought it was a good standard match. I mean, you always felt Alcaraz was going to win it, kind of before and during. But I thought De Minaur brought a good game, played some good stuff. It's been a really good week for Alcaraz. I mean, you know, me and Calvin have been having a bit of back and forth, haven't we, about kind of Alcaraz and Murray. And, you know, Calvin was saying, oh, he only just snuck past Rinderknecht. And I was kind of thinking, oh, is Calvin right here? Is he just going to struggle to kind of get used to this? But he's gone from strength to strength as the week's gone on. And I think the win against Korda really stands out as a result on paper. I think Korda's a really good grass court player and good player generally, who's obviously, you know, had fitness problems, but I think he's one of the more likely people, if he's fit, to do pretty well at Wimbledon. So I think to beat him 3 and 4 is a good result. Similarly, I think De Minaur actually can do quite well at Wimbledon with a good draw. It wouldn't surprise me to see him kind of go to the quarters. So I think he's had a good week against good opposition. Even Lehechka's a good player. Dimitrov's had some form on grass over the years, even if he's a little bit out of it at the moment. Looks pretty comfortable. He's one of only 2 guys who it feels vaguely realistic that they might challenge Novak, to be honest, at Wimbledon. So I think this was a really important result to kind of actually prove he can win a title on grass and kind of get a bit of intrigue, because otherwise it was just going to feel a little bit flat going into Wimbledon.
Who is the other guy you think can challenge Novak on grass?
I still think... I don't really believe he can beat Novak on grass, but I think Medvedev showed signs of being in decent form on grass last year and could cause him problems. The problem is, I mean, there's other players who've shown good form on the grass over the years, but they all feel kind of out of form or have got injury problems. So that I'm thinking kind of Berrettini's obviously out, Kyrgios. You know, whether you think he could beat Novak or not, he was brilliant on the grass last year and gave it a good final. He's barely making it, it feels like. Murray's very past it, despite what some people are clinging on to. Yeah, so I don't think there's many. So really, I think it's just Medvedev and Alcaraz on the basis that they're the best 2 players in the world behind Novak. So
yeah. Calvin, as George has alluded to there, you've got differing opinions on Alcaraz versus Murray in a sort of vacuum on grass. Does this week from Alcaraz change your opinion at all?
Yeah, it's got to, hasn't it? Yeah, I mean, I would, after seeing that now, I'd make Alcaraz favourite against Murray for sure. But I do at the same time think that, like, you know, I do think Murray offers more on grass than he does on any other surface at this stage in his career. But yeah, it's pretty impressive from Alcaraz. You know, he looked like he was very, very comfortable on it. At the same time, without actually beating anybody who you would class as a very top level opponent. I didn't see the match yesterday, but somebody told me that they felt that Korda played against Alcaraz, and that's why he lost. And if he'd have played the ball, he'd have won it. But I didn't see it, so I can't comment. But Korda looked good as well, I thought. De Minaur, yeah, you know, it's all right. He's tricky on grass because he hits the ball so flat.
Right.
And, you know, he's quick. He's tricky at Wimbledon, especially because courts are pretty slow. I saw, you know, a good win against Rune, although surprisingly Rune was injured. Didn't lose a clean match again. You know. But, yeah.
So what I think is quite interesting is that, you know, a week ago we were like, we don't know if Carlos Alcaraz is any good on grass, and now we're like, well, okay, he clearly is. But he's clearly such a student of the game. So he's not been working with Juan Carlos Ferrero this week. Ferrero's off on holiday. And so he's been working with Samuel Lopez, who is Pablo Carreño Buster's coach, but Buster is out with, I think, a long-running knee injury at the moment. And he's talked a lot about how he's been watching videos of like Federer and Murray to try and learn how to move. And he says he hasn't really been watching Djokovic for that because Djokovic slides on grass and he thinks he can never do that. And the other thing that was noticeable in press today was we were talking to him about Wimbledon and Djokovic, and he kept pulling these stats out about, I think I saw that Djokovic hasn't lost on centre court since 2013, and I think I saw that Djokovic has got 86 wins at Wimbledon, and the rest of the top 20 combined have got 85, which in itself is an incredible stat.
Crazy.
But it just strikes me that he's like clearly a bit of a tennis nerd and like clearly really engaged. And Calvin, you may be able to say otherwise, but it feels to me like not every player is like that. And there are quite a lot of players who aren't that engaged with tennis and who kind of do their job and they do the practice and they study the tape with their coach. But then outside of that, they don't really want to think about tennis.
Yeah. I don't know. Don't really know what the answer to that would be, to be honest.
I mean, how much like in the in the players' lounge and stuff, like how much chat is there about tennis in general?
There's quite a bit, but it's more. I guess it's more the politics of tennis that gets talked about there, rather than actual matches and types of opponent and that kind of thing. They've generally got the TVs on, and with the matches going on, and there'll be some comments about the score and that kind of thing, but. I find it's more. It depends who's around there. Some players you don't see ever in the players' area and that kind of thing. So, Alcaraz was actually there quite a bit last week, playing a lot of darts. Him and his team.
I saw him playing darts actually. Yeah,
him and his team.
Was he any good?
Really got into the darts. I didn't see from afar. He didn't look to have the smoothest action, as you can imagine. It was very intense. His throw.
I mean, we've talked before about like multi-sport individuals, but like I have seen this week alone, Carlos Alcaraz playing golf, basketball, darts, and obviously tennis. Like maybe it's just when you're young and an athlete and just kind of living the dream and relaxed, but he's clearly like a fiercely competitive and like, I don't know, he just seems to have oodles of energy, doesn't he?
Yeah, and you know what? He seems like a really top lad. I mean, there was one. I was there last week, and there wasn't many people in there. And he was in there just talking to a couple of the waiters. He was watching the tennis, and they were still watching it as well. And he could have been absolutely anybody. I guess the weird thing as well. He's probably their age.
Yeah,
like that's the thing. It's like they were probably the only other two people in the entire room who he was the same age as.
Yeah,
and he was just having a bit of a chat with them, and I was impressed with him just as a person, and he's not as big as I've seen him before, but this was probably the most time because, like I say, he was in the players' area quite a bit. He's not as big as I thought he was, to be fair, in terms of height or size. He's a solid guy, but he's not a giant by any stretch.
As I say, they were talking about this in the commentary of the match earlier about how Alcaraz has been very kind of nice to the staff behind the scenes and stuff, and they rightly made the point that the person who's got the biggest reputation for being like that is, of course, Rafa Nadal, who's someone who young Spaniards kind of model themselves on. The other thing I did want to say just quickly about the match, I mean, there was a slight concern at the end of the first set. He had a bit of treatment on his
right thigh,
groin abductor sort of thing. He played fine in the second set and didn't look like it, but that's just always something to keep a bit of an eye on. He does still feel like, and it's unsurprising because he's a 20-year-old kind of growing into a massive body, but does feel he is still a bit vulnerable to injuries, perhaps more than Novak is at the moment, for example. But
I mean, it's load, isn't it? Like, he's played a lot, and when you look at, this year alone, he missed the Australian Open because he picked up an injury, on the eve of the tournament, effectively. He missed a couple at the start of the clay court season because he had post-traumatic arthritis, he called it, but a wrist problem by all accounts, and a muscular problem as well. He's obviously had that cramping stuff, but that actually did also cause a bit of a right arm issue. And then this thigh thing, we know during the French Open he wasn't really practicing on his days off. That suggests they're very conscious of load. And, Rune, you kind of alluded to it, Calvin, but, Rune has also been through some pretty, heavy workloads and has looked to suffer because of it. I think of, for example, the final in Rome against Rude at the French Open as well. He looked pretty cooked. There is definitely something to be said for these young guys when they're, 19, 20, and they break into the top 10, and it's like, play all the events, you have to play all the Masters, you play all the slams, and then you're getting offers of big appearance fees from these 500s left, right, and centre, and so you go and play them, and you play. I know for a fact that Alcaraz and Rune are both playing 2 exhibition matches next week as well. It does just start to feel. It feels like deja vu, but like these guys have got to be careful how much they're playing. Like they've got to look at it and think, this is a long game, not a short game. I'm just quite surprised to see a lack of load management, I guess, because the calendar can kill you.
Yeah, it can, but the problem is, I don't think it's that bad, to be honest. If you go and play all the time, I think it's more, I don't think they're in sort of Dominic Thiem range of just going and playing everything. And this is just a busy part of the year. I'd seen some debate on Twitter. I think it was Petch who was asking, might be wrong, it might not be Petch, but I think it was. He was saying, should we have an extra week in between the French and Wimbledon? But as somebody pointed out, they would only go and play exhibitions anyway.
Yeah.
So, and they're not as taxing by any stretch, or even if they didn't do that, they'd just go and train. It's not like if players have a week off of tournaments, they just wouldn't go and do anything. The training weeks are probably, they are more taxing than a tournament week. Maybe not emotionally and mentally, but physically they are. Otherwise, there's no point doing them.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's, other than a full revolution of the tennis calendar, I don't think we'll see it changing much. And there is space, it's only because this week when I was looking at, just like I said, Henry's injured, and we were looking at what's coming up kind of from when he's fit again. And after the US Open, there's basically hardly any 250s. You have the 2 Masters, and I think there's a couple of 500s. But I think it's only 2 weeks of 250s after US Open, which is start of September.
Yeah, I wonder how that's going to work itself out, actually, because there's been some licenses moving around with Chinese tennis coming back, and I was just looking at some stats about overall number of matches, and it's maybe something that we'll see shake out in the wash at the end. But Holger Rune, I'm just taking him as an example because I think he's looked quite knackered at quite a few events, has played 45 matches already this year. And when I'm just looking at Dominic Thiem's peak, and he's obviously, as you mentioned, Calvin, the archetype of overuse, he played 82, I think, in his busiest ever year. So he's kind of on pace to do something pretty similar to that, I would suggest. And I think Murray in his busiest year played about the same number of matches off the top. I've not got that in front of me, that's off the top of my head. I don't know. It may well be that, Rune takes a month off after Wimbledon and doesn't go and play Gstaad and Bastard and Mustard and Testard, and then gets to the end of the year and only plays 60 matches, and it's fine, and he looks really fit at the US Open, and we're all saying what a brilliant job. But it just strikes me there are 2 guys in the top 10 right now who are both 20, both playing an awful lot, and who are also both have looked quite cooked in a few matches. So maybe something to watch out for, George.
The other thing is that they're both winning a lot, which does add to the load a lot. Sometimes it's difficult in terms of you kind of plan your calendar, and I don't know if Holger Rune, he probably did think he was going to win lots of matches this week, but I don't know if I had Holger Rune down at the start of the year to have won as many matches as he has, which obviously increases the load if you're playing kind of 5 matches a week. I think I'm right in saying that Novak, when he was going for the French Open a while ago against Federer, he lost the semi-finals, and that was his first defeat of the whole year. He played something like 49 matches going into that. But I bet his schedule actually wasn't that bad. It was just he won every bloody match. So he probably only played about 5, 6 weeks, 7 weeks of tournaments before that. So, there are a lot of variables. But yeah, you're right. They're winning a lot of matches and they're playing a lot of matches. And I don't really see that changing that much. It feels like both of them, well, particularly not in Alcaraz's case, but I think for Rune as well, I fancy him to have a really good summer hardcourt swing. And he looked, I thought, okay on the grass, actually. He could do potentially well here as well. So, Yeah, they'll be playing a lot, I think.
Yeah, which I just, I'd hate to see it come back and bite us. I don't know. I want to pick up a listener question because I've been ropey about doing it in the last couple of weeks. So I've got one here from Sarah. It's Sarah without an H, so I'm assuming it's Sarah. Apologies if I got that wrong. I just wondered if Calvin, or indeed any of you, has any intel about Isabel Lacey. She's only 16, but I've noticed her popping up at ITFs recently. Got a couple of good wins over Golubich and Brengel. Could she be GB's next big thing on the WTA side? Because we definitely need one. No shortage of truth there. Calvin, Isabel Lacey, give us your debrief.
I know Isabel Lacey a little bit because she played against the Yorkshire team that I captained at County Cup earlier this year. Yeah, she's a good player. Good player, competes well. Has a good tennis brain. She's got a good coach. Alice the Filmer coaches her, who's, definitely knows how to coach. She's one of the best coaches in the country. Andy runs a very, very funny Twitter account called Tour Coach on Tour, which is a bit of a parody of some tennis coaches who we know. But yeah, she's a good player. You don't want to heap pressure on and say what she's going to do or what she's not going to do. There is some good play. I mean, like, Isabel Lacey's a good player. Hannah Klugman's an exceptional talent, I think. And I think that, she's as good a player as I've seen at her age from Britain.
So Hannah Klugman is 14 and was playing French Open Juniors. I think she won a round, maybe 2 rounds at French Open Juniors. I went and watched her, the match she lost. The name of the opponent I cannot remember, but she was like already playing. She has wins on the WTA tour. She was, I think, already top 400. She was a pretty serious player. And I think, 14 to be playing juniors is pretty impressive at that level, isn't it, Calvin?
Yeah, she's also, she's a tall girl. She's got weapons. She's probably, like I say, she's maybe the best player I've seen at that age in a British player. She's definitely the most complete player I've seen at that age. There's no obvious weaknesses. She attacks well, she defends well, and she transitions well. She's just a very, very good player. There's other, the girls' situation's pretty solid. There's those two, and then there's Rana Stoiber, who's an excellent player as well, who I think is playing at Wimbledon qualies maybe tomorrow. I'm not sure.
I will get up in front of me. George, you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think it probably leads us on quite nicely to these wildcards. I thought the women's qualifying ones were quite interesting because there's also Ming Zhu, I think.
Mimi Zhu, yeah.
Mimi Zhu.
Yeah,
so she's 15 as well. I can't really remember. I'm sure there must have been in the past, but certainly not when I was on the beat. I can't remember a 14-year-old being given a qualifying wildcard. There was obviously that year Goff did really well through qualifying. She was 15, I think. But 14 is really young. That'll be a hell of a story and a hell of a profile if she managed to come through qualifying. That people will know about it.
Yeah.
Has Anna Klugman got a wildcard into qualies?
Yeah, the women's qualifying singles wildcards are Emily Appleton, Nike Baines, Anna Brogan, Liv Hovda of America, Hannah Klugman, Izzy Lacey, Eden Silver, and her name is Mingji Zhu, but Mimi Zhu is what everyone I have heard call her. Has Rana not got one then, or has she got a main? No, Rana has not got a wildcard. Which I was slightly surprised at, but they're not using all 9 that they could have used, so I'm going to assume that she's maybe not asked for one, or if she's still eligible to play girls, maybe she's playing girls instead.
Yeah, but it's unlikely that you're going to be in the second week, and if you are, then you'd absolutely ditch the juniors, wouldn't you?
yeah, exactly. But
it's a bit odd that. Because Rana, in that company, unless she's injured, I don't know, but she'd absolutely be in the mix with. She'd be better than a lot of those players.
She's not injured as far as I know because she played qualies at Eastbourne yesterday. But obviously wouldn't have entered that until she knew the Wimbledon decision. So I don't fully know. But yeah, Klugman is the one that everyone talks about as the one who's gonna, be the player. That's for sure. I don't know whether there's any men in the qualifying draw that you want to mention. Of the wild cards, Calvin, it's Broome, Dan Cox, Billy Harris, Johannes Munday, Stuart Parker, Millie Polachak, Luca Powell, Toby Samuel, Harry Vendelken. I know we were talking about Billy Harris the other day. He's obviously... I thought Billy Harris was a bit lucky not to get a main draw wildcard, to be honest.
He's dropped a bit in the last year. I think qualifying's fair. I'd definitely have given Billy a qualifying one. I would find it hard to justify a main, but hopefully he can come through qualies.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've gone big with the college players into main and qualies this year. The LTA like the college route at the minute. It's good to see George Loughagen get one. I think.
I was going to say,
very talented athlete.
I think the men's main draw wild cards are more interesting than the female ones, and I think the female qualifying ones are more interesting this year. But yeah, I think Loughagen's definitely a really interesting one. He basically had left the game really. George wasn't enjoying playing at all, and I'd actually had to sit down with George a couple of years ago and talk to him about his tennis, and he said he just wasn't enjoying it. Didn't felt that he basically thought tennis had taken a lot from his younger life, and he'd not enjoyed life so much. So he think he started working in a bar or something, and came back and started working with Ryan Jones, who's a really good coach, friend of mine. And George just seems like a different person now. He just seems like more mature, and he's a very, very talented boy. He's had a really good rise, done really well, so he has really deserved the opportunity. I've met George a long time ago, walking actually with him on my only trip to pre-qualifying at Wimbledon, which I don't know if you remember this, but it was one of my favourite matches I covered in my tennis journalism days. It was Dan Evans versus Marcus Willis. And it was when Evo had come back from his drugs ban that year and his ranking hadn't come up. So he had to go through pre-qualifying and played Marcus Willis. And it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, the match itself was very entertaining. But it was the back and forth. And because pre-qualifying is so small, it's basically there were no fans. You literally just stood at the side, basically, kind of man and a dog sort of thing. And they were just going at it, and I basically wrote a whole article kind of detailing all these things you could kind of hear with them like jibing at each other the whole way through, like Evo calling him overweight or something. And, it was brilliant. I really, really enjoyed it. So if you go back and Google that match and find my article, you'll find a load of verbatim transcripts of it. If you don't remember it, it's well worth a look.
It's interesting, Calvin, just to drag us back to George Loughagen, what you were saying about going away from the game and coming back more mature. I mean, I know part of the idea of pushing people into the college route is to do this, but there is definitely more than one way to skin a cat in this stuff, isn't it? You can kind of find a way back into the game. Although I was trying to think of like who the most significant example. I guess Ash Barty is the one who obviously went away and played cricket and then came back to tennis a much better player. But, that maybe we should be offering that as more of an option for people to say, go away and live a bit of a life for a couple of years and then come back to it a bigger person.
Yeah, I mean, the strange thing with George's career is that he basically hasn't lost any time. He took about 18 months out and he's come back so refreshed that he's now where he would have expected him realistically to be if he hadn't taken any time off, and probably wouldn't have got that high because he wouldn't be the player he is, having seen more of the world at this stage now. So, I just think it's a good story, and George's a good lad, really good lad, and just happy for him and happy for Ryan, who's his coach, and I think for fair play to the All England club for deciding on that, or the LTA who pushed it, because it's a bold one, that one. Yeah. That there are higher ranked players who haven't got them, and I probably wouldn't have given them to those players. But again, I think it's probably worth having some debate about this wildcard situation, because I've seen this week again like the same. I know Mike Dixon has a rant about, he's always rabbiting on about wildcards and that kind of thing, and people just don't seem to understand the economic situation and the food chain of British tennis. And say there was some talk of like you're getting some strange debates on Twitter in general, but this week I think Mike said something about how maybe giving wildcards is that it creates the problem in the culture of British tennis. Now, France gave 7 to French players who didn't make the tournament, and they've got the best tennis culture in the world. And I made that point in a reply on Twitter. Then I had somebody going, "Oh yeah, but how many Grand Slam winners have they had?" Like, France have 11% of the top 100 in the world at the minute. and us in Britain are mocking them, going, "Oh, well, maybe, how many Grand Slam winners have they got?" Like, cultures create top 100 players, top 200 players, top 100 players. Individual talent creates Grand Slam winners.
Yeah.
That's culture helps that. And you can go, I always think that circumstance beats talent. Like, all the time. Ideally, you want both. You want talent combining with circumstance, but talent on its own might get you a Grand Slam winner. Talent and circumstance will definitely get you one, but circumstance on its own or culture won't get you Grand Slam winners. You have to have individual talent for that, and maybe the French just haven't had an individual talent who could win a Grand Slam, but they've certainly got a tennis culture and they give their wild card. What are we going to do? Are we really going to just not give any British players wild cards? Is that the suggestion? Because, if I'm honest, nobody actually deserves a wild card. When we talk about deserving a wild card, no one actually deserves one, because if you deserved one, your ranking would be at a place that would get you in. So there's no deserved and there's no doesn't deserve. You just sometimes get some, or you don't. And I think that I don't know if I would say George Lofhagen deserves one or any of the other players deserve a wild card, but I think they've basically got the right decisions this time.
So you're sort of talking about British tennis there and not having top 100. So here's a little question for you, Calvin, given your knowledge of these young players. So we've got Ferry and Lofhagen on the men's side. We've got Klugman, Lacey, Zhu on the women's side. Which situation should we be more excited about as British tennis fans?
I always think top 100 is a weird place to look at in terms of, like, that's what success is. Because you need to create a situation where there's a food chain. And so just sort of saying, we've spent too long in Britain. We've probably spent 20 years going, he's not going to be a top 100 player. Let's just pie him off. Or she's not going to be a top 100, pie them off. And what you get is you get no players. So then when a player does come along who's, say, if you have a player who, let's say player X is a good player, but is not going to make top 100 in the world, but they might be around 300, 250, 200. But you go, they'll never be a top 200 player, so you don't help them out at all, and they end up leaving the game. When player Y comes along, who's a younger version, who definitely does have the ability, who's he going to practice with? Who's he going to play against? If the players who are 250 have gone, the aim shouldn't be top 100, because top 100 basically doesn't mean anything. It doesn't get you in any tournaments. There's no tournament in the world that top 100 gets you in.
Well, Grand Slams, surely.
No, specifically, I'm talking. It's not like you're not in at 101, James, and you're in at 99. It's there or thereabouts. You're probably competing at the slams, but 250 will generally get you in slam qualies. And if you get in slam qualies, then you probably start making a bit of money, because you're then probably, if you're 250, you're probably winning a few challenges a year. You're making a few other qualies for 250s and that ATP 250s and 500s and that kind of thing. The aim should be 250 and then see where we go from there. It shouldn't be talk of top 100 is just pie in the sky, because what you're going to do is, what about if somebody's 190? Are we really going to go, they're only going to be 190, let's pie them off? Because at 190, you're playing every single Grand Slam qualies, and you only have to win 3 matches to get in a slam then.
You've ably dodged my question quite well there, Calvin, with a rant about the structure.
No, but the question is, though, George, I don't know if you would get more excited. I mean, I think Hannah Klugman's a very exciting prospect, I'll be honest. But everything's not linear. Everything, sport and tennis, there's no blueprint for it. It's not linear. So as much as Hannah Klugman looks very good now, I don't know. She's as good as I've seen a 14-year-old. At the same time, George Lofhagen wasn't playing tennis a year ago. Like, he was working in a bar 18 months ago. Emma Raducanu, if you'd have said that 20 months ago that she wouldn't have won, she wouldn't have made it past the second round of a slam after she won the first one, you'd think we were crazy. Sport doesn't work like that. We don't have a crystal ball, but what we can do is put situations in place that allow players to excel.
Just one more defence of the British wildcards as well from a Wimbledon perspective. I mean, anyone who's been to Wimbledon knows in that first week of a slam, the matches on court 12, court 18, with a British player in them, it's always a great atmosphere. It's always, people absolutely love it, and it is good sport kind of getting behind a kind of home nation. And, I think Wimbledon would be quite short-sighted to lose that, really. It gives people a thing to be invested in. And so,
it'd be pretty dull. Again, I don't get the idea of just arguing about, British players shouldn't be given them. How would you plan on getting any players through then on that basis? Because first round at Wimbledon, I don't know the exact amount, but it's about 50 grand. Right, that will finance you for the year. That will, let's take, for example, George or Arthur or any of the other wildcards who've got them, Liam, Penno, that will basically sort them out. And they're not getting any money from the LTA now. I don't know, Arthur maybe, because I think he's probably on some PSP funding or something. The other three are not getting anything from the LTA. They don't get any funding, right? Being a tennis player costs you money, especially in George's situation, who's 350, 400 in the world. It costs you money to get around. So that will allow him to go to the tournaments he needs to go to now. That will allow him to take his coach with him, to employ his coach for more weeks to help him develop his game. So what you're going to do? No, we're not doing that because it doesn't help the culture. It's absolute bullshit.
And of course, it gives someone like Lofhagen the opportunity to maybe win a couple of matches, and then suddenly his ranking flies up, and suddenly he's in better tournaments and kind of got better chances for his career. And
there's
feels
been
he's earned
players,
that chance.
Yeah, there's been players who you think, and I've seen them, who you've got wildcards in the past, and you thought they don't. That's not really a smart move because they don't really care about their tennis. They don't really enjoy tennis anyway, and they're just going to take that 50 grand and they're going to enjoy themselves with it, right? But none of these players fall into that category. So complain about none of these players are going to take their tennis for granted. I'll tell you that now, who've got it. So when Mike Dixon, I got a lot of time for Mike Dixon. He talks a lot of sense. But when Mike Dixon comes out and starts criticising these players or criticising the decision to give these players wildcards, he's well wide of the mark there.
I think it's also worth pointing out that, sorry, George, to cut across you, but I've had this in my head for a while. I think it's also worth pointing out that, would you rather that we took, say, I'm just very quickly trying to do the maths. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 British wildcards. Took £250,000 from Wimbledon and put it into tennis somehow otherwise, where people criticise the LTA all the time for how they put money into the game otherwise? Or would you rather say to someone, yes, here is £55,000 and an opportunity to make a name for yourself. Go out and earn £120,000. Go out and earn, third round, fourth round prize money. It does happen that these guys win matches. Yeah. It's not just a charity donation and, go out and try and take a set off someone. It's a genuine, we want you to go and win a match and make it worth our while.
I think the only thing I would say on the money front again is that I think if the players are funded by the LTA, I think I wouldn't be opposed to going, you give half of that back. Half of your prize money back or something at that point. Because they've basically funded them to the degree that they won't need for anything in their tennis career for the next 12 months.
Yeah.
So I think on top of that, to get 50 grand is a bit much, but I think you could go, right, if you get wildcarded to Wimbledon, you get, half of that prize money goes back into the LTA funding pot, or maybe to fund another player or something like that, or put on a couple of 25Ks or...
Yeah.
There's something, I'm going a bit off topic there as well. I've seen that the LTA, the ATP and WTA have reduced the fine, haven't they? They got 700 grand back, the LTA today.
Yeah,
Now, we were told that there was going to be more tournaments in the UK this year, and the reason there couldn't be was because of the size of the fine that they got. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the calendar for the remainder of the year, because that's almost £750,000 back in the pot. Put a hell of a lot of tournaments on that, does. Excited to see where they'll be, lads.
I have one last thing that bothers me actually more than anything about Wimbledon wildcards, which I alluded to in our WhatsApp chat earlier. It annoys me that wildcards Wimbledon happen before another Grand Slam, as in the rankings are not right.
Right.
So as in, like Svitolina, it feels stupid to me that Alina Svitolina should have a wild card into Wimbledon when she's world number 70 now, because she's had a good French Open.
Yeah.
I know it's a bit of a thing where they always do it kind of 6 weeks in advance or whatever, but I really think by now in the modern age you should be able to process that the week after the French Open. Why on earth does it need to be that long?
I mean, I appreciate there's a lot of logistics that go into running a Grand Slam, and I will never fully appreciate that unless someone gives me the job of doing it, which they're never going to do. But yeah, you'd think that, especially now that the grass court season is that week longer, you could at least... I don't know. So you'd have to wait until after the French Open, right? So you'd then have to freeze... You'd take the entry list from the first week of
Monday after.
Yeah. Which is like... I mean, that's a tight turnaround, to be fair, because that would also have to be the quali entry list. So that means you've only got 2 weeks between, like, finalising the entry list and starting qualies.
But what's the net? Maybe I'm just not appreciating the logistics of this. But what's the difference between knowing every person there at that point? Surely it's more on the actual individual who's going, but the rankings don't shift that wildly at the French Open that people wouldn't be going to they'd still be going to qualifying if they're not in the main draw anyway, right? So it's not like such a switch. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. Like Svitolina would potentially bump someone out of the main draw, but there's not that many other players who would have climbed in that would be such a change that they then wouldn't be going into qualifying. So what's the big logistical change?
What about the players who only got into qualifying rankings because of the points they earned, in those 2 weeks of the French Open, however they earned them? Like, they then all of a sudden have 2 weeks to, like, reroute their schedule, book flights, book whole hotels. I mean, Calvin is the man to ask this, George.
I mean, what I would say is that, like, for one on that one, I take the point that you're making, and I think there should be some way of sorting it out. But at the same time, they didn't use all the women's wildcards, so it's not like she's taken one off anybody. Mm. So, like, that is... Like,
but just in terms of logistics...
But they shouldn't. This is the weird... Yeah, I mean... No, they shouldn't. But again, there are logistics. Look, try getting some... if you're a tennis player and you don't know that you're playing at Wimbledon until 2 weeks before, try and finding some accommodation in London around that time. Because I tell you now, because I know for a fact, that the Wimbledon give you a per diem per day to spend on accommodation, and it's a lot of money, and it's borderline not enough for accommodation.
I mean, my point there would be that I think we're talking about potentially 5 people max who will drop out of a main draw place, really. So they'd be going to qualifying anyway. So in terms of logistics, for them, there's not that big a shift. So it wouldn't be a case of they wouldn't be going.
Like, but what about all the people who move up? For example.
Yeah, but they don't really, do they? I mean, like, how many players outside the top 1?
People drop out.
And you're using an example of one who has.
Well, okay, so to take Svitolina as an example, I mean, I'd have to look at the 2 lists, but I can't imagine there are that many players who were outside the top 50, 150 rather, who moved into a Grand Slam place at the French Open. I'm sure it's 5 or fewer, but they won't have moved from outside the top 250 into a main draw slot, will they?
No, but they might have moved out from outside the top 250 into a qualifying slot, which is frankly the same thing from logistical.
But how would they do that if they weren't 250 before the French Open? They wouldn't be in qualifying for that.
Challenges. There's challenges going on.
Yeah, there are other ways of earning points outside of Grand Slams, George.
Okay, but I think if you're at that level, then you're pretty used to changing your schedule as well. Would be my other retort to that. I think you do have to plan
just
on the fly.
fucking deal with it, Calvin. That's what George is trying to say. It's your problem.
Basically, yeah, that is what I'm saying.
I mean,
I think the numbers are small, anyways.
I don't know. I leave the entries to the lads who I coach because it's so complicated, and every year, even the players who are most organised, and Henry and Luke, who I coach, are very, very organised with their entries, and this stands for everybody. one player will make some cock up once a year with their schedule, where they end up in a tournament that they don't want to be in, or they won't enter a tournament that they really 100% were intending on entering. Like, you had a situation at Queen's where Tommy Paul he's like 16 in the world and he had to qualify. He forgot to enter. Or
is that right?
Or his agent forgot to enter or something. I don't know what the details were. And, you know, that's rough as well. So, like Billy Harris, who we were talking about earlier, he won a qualifying match and then ends up getting to have to play Tommy Paul. You shouldn't be having to play the world number 16 in a qualifying tournament.
Well, one final wildcard point, because I think we have done wildcards to death now, but we should also congratulate Calvin on Luke and Julian getting a wildcard as well. So that was great to see.
Yeah, so that's why Calvin thinks all the wildcards are right this year.
Well, no, I mean, in fairness, Julian was in. Julian and Henry were getting in anyway. Yes. They were playing. And Luke, like, I'd have been, you know, Luke's the highest ranked Brit who wasn't getting in direct.
Right.
So he would have got in anyway, I would think. So it didn't really, I don't want to dismiss it, but it didn't really come as that much of a surprise. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you know, I don't, you know, it's one of those. It's like I don't really get the going on social media, all the players doing, thanking the LTA and thanking Wimbledon. You know, it's like, you know, all right, nice one, got a wild card. Thought I was going to get one anyway because I'm a good player.
Very good. Right, well, let's move on to something slightly less contentious, and then I check the running order and remember there's nothing less contentious. Oh no, I'll tell you what, here's a softball for you, Calvin. Kate Middleton's forehand.
Well, if you want you can buy today's Telegraph, and I mean, don't do that. It's Tory paper, isn't it? So, yeah, you know, get 12-foot ladder and like skip the paywall on the Telegraph, and see what I got to say about Kate Middleton's forehand.
Great, that's a new legal thing for us to deal with. We are not supporting theft.
Don't quite know how to move on for that. People may have seen that Roger Federer and the person who I was criticised on Twitter for not calling Her Royal Highness Catherine, Princess of Wales.
How dare you?
Everyone I know calls her Kate Middleton, but apparently I should. The best thing was that the person whose tweet got the most traction was like, don't have a lot of time for the institution, but show some respect and call her HRH. And I was like, wait, so you don't like the Royals, but you do want to call them by the made-up titles that they insist on being called?
This is my second interaction on tennis with Kate Middleton. I don't know whether I've told you both.
No, far away.
No.
Well, I mean, it will come to not many people's surprise that I am not a big fan of the monarchy. And
you shock me.
And people like freeloading and somehow being told that we have to respect people even though they've done nothing to achieve that respect. But yeah, a couple of years ago at the NTC, she came in, they shut the whole place down. I was staying there because the lad I was coaching at the time lived down London, so I was basically living there at the time, and they shut the whole building down for her to come in and do some sort of publicity thing, and she was on court with a few kids and the national coaches were there, but then one of the national coaches fell ill on the morning and she was going to come and do a meet and greet, and they'd done the whole rehearsal and what have you. So I was just sort of wandering round, and they said, we're one person down, can you come on and join in? Would you be happy to join in later? This was before they'd arrived and what have you. And I said, yeah, okay, fair enough, if it helps. I'm not doing anything else. And they went, right, this is the procedure. And they like, so she, you know, start off, you're going to come over and she's going to come and shake your hand and she'll meet you, and then you've got to bow. And I was going, there's absolutely no chance I'm bowing for anybody. And they were like, no, you've got to. And I was like, there's zero chance that's happening. And they go, well, you're not going to be able to do it then. And it's like, okay, I won't do it then. So, yeah, but there was absolute, unless you were, I mean, Simon Briggs, who asked me to do it, said, like, I told him that yesterday, and he was like, but if it was John Squire, you would have. I was like, absolutely. He's a great guitarist. Short of maybe John Squire and Eric Cantona, there's not many people I think bowing for. So, and then when Briggsy asked me to do if I would analyse her technique for his article, I sent him the analysis that I did, and I said, I only do whatever you want to do with the words on it, but all I'll ask is that you don't have me calling her Her Royal Highness or Princess Catherine or anything like that.
Which I love. James, I was going to. That's a
I will
brilliant
say,
story.
I will say that on that, apparently she was very nice at the when she came into the NTC, and it was more a moral and ethical stance that I took. But apparently everyone said she was very nice when she came in.
That's an amazing story. I very much enjoyed that. But I was going to come in on James's comment about kind of people on Twitter being weird. I saw a tweet this week, and I'll read it to you, because I was just like, honestly, sometimes, when you just think, am I living on a different planet to people? What on earth is all? This is something that someone tweeted about another human being that they're never going to have met in their life or know anything about. I just find it bizarre. I'm sorry, but her level of beauty, talent, elegance, and spectacular grace is unrivaled. I cannot emphasise heavily enough how astonishingly lucky the UK and realms are. Realms! To have the Princess of Wales as an ambassador. What the actual hell is wrong with people? They're off their bloody heads.
I want to look. Royal family opinions aside, wherever, because look, people like
do like
royals.
them.
Lots
So
of people
that's,
do. Whatever.
That's up to them.
For anyone to, I just for anyone to have that opinion of anyone they've never met, and I just find it staggering. I want to meet these people so I can believe that they're real, because otherwise I'm just are these bots created by the Tories to torment us?
It definitely gets too much of a rise out of me as well. I really just need to get off the internet sometimes. It's just wind me up.
My boss, every now and again, I go into the office. This time of year, I go to the office about once a month, and I sit.
It's really strange. I know that when the Queen died last year, my mate who works for an American company, and he was getting emails from Americans going, "Oh, commiserations today, mate."
Yeah, okay.
Why?
I will. So I was in the States when the Queen died, and I will tell you a story. I don't think I've told this on the pod before, but I'm sure I've told both of you this. I was in America for the death of the Queen, and it was weird, as you imagine. Not as weird as it was back here, I think. But people were genuinely coming over to offer their condolences to where all the Brits were sitting, and saying things like, "Oh, you must all be gutted," or "Oh, I think I've cried more than you have," and I was like, "Well, that's definitely true." Old woman dies. That is sad, and I must admit, I'm pretty heavily institutionalized. I've been brought up. All of my family have met the Queen. I haven't. I could feel that there was something important happening or historic. But, I'm not going to say I was crying when she died, because, as I say, I'd never met the woman, unlike literally my whole family. But yes, it was just, they just don't get it. They just don't really understand. Someone said to me, "Oh, is it like if your great-grandmother dies?" And I was like, "No. It's nothing."
Well, I think
it is to some people, isn't it?
But I think that was the worst thing, though, because I ended up having quite a big row in one of my WhatsApp groups with some of my mates, and one person said I know it's a tennis podcast, this, so I don't want to really stretch it on, but one person said she was like everyone's grandma. It's she wasn't like my grandma. And my grandma loved the Queen, by the way. My grandma, I think it's a generational thing as well. My grandma was basically the same age as the Queen, and absolutely loved her, and that's that must be a different dynamic. But it's like my grandma, because my grandma knew who I was. That's the main difference. Speaking of certain parts of America, I was talking to someone earlier on, again, slightly off topic. Again, one of the weirdest things I've seen on tour this year was when we were in Dallas, and they played the national anthem before every single match, which was weird. And it was an indoor tournament, and both the courts were on the same. Both the tournaments were in the same building, but they played the national anthem, or had someone come in and sing the national anthem before every match on the centre court. So if you were playing on the other court, you just had to wait while they did Star Spangled Banner.
Oh my God!
In between points, and it's is there need for the seventh time of this today? Is there really need for us to go through it for the seventh time? But yeah.
I mean, there is so much more to say about this, George, and you're going to have the last word.
My last one was going to be, I fear we're about to get bombarded with 1-star reviews after opening this can of worms.
But yeah, forehander's all right. Serve, not so much. Right.
All right. Okay. Good to know.
What's wrong with the serve?
Have a read, George. Pay for the telephone subscription, or don't and find it other ways.
I think hilariously, I do pay for it because I really like reading Simon's tennis.
No,
work.
sport. To be fair, the sports
really
stuff
good.
in there is really good.
Yeah. And I also cannot work out how to cancel the bloody thing. I have tried a few times, and it is impossible. I think it should be illegal how hard it is to do.
You have to ring them. I've seen it, and you can't get through on the phone.
Yeah. I'm sure there is meant to be a law. This is getting really niche now and very non-tennis, but I'm sure there's meant to be a law that, or if there's not, there bloody well should be one, that things should be as easy to leave as they are to sign up. That should be a law.
It should be that whatever platform you have signed up on, you are then able to cancel on. I'd just like to remind everyone this is Tennis Unfiltered you're listening to.
Rather than the Royal Telegraph podcast.
Pretty much not been about tennis at any point this evening, but we are doing our best, I assure you. Right, let's bring us heavily back down to earth with Jelena Ostapenko beating Barbora Krejcikova in Birmingham, which feels like the most tennis-y thing I have written down in front of me. Jelena Ostapenko said this week it's her favourite surface grass and she just wishes there was more opportunity to play on it. Well, she certainly proved that, beating Barbora Krejcikova 7-6, 6-4 to claim the title. She said it's great preparation for Wimbledon and I'm happy with the way I'm playing. What a cracking quote that is. Yes, she will go to Wimbledon. She'll go to Eastbourne first, I believe. She's still entered there and hasn't pulled out, so we shall see. George, we've probably not talked about Jelena Ostapenko enough on this podcast. She's probably someone we should have in our dark horses for the title at Wimbledon, shouldn't we?
I don't think she'll win the title, but I often pick her at Wimbledon. I think she's very capable of doing some damage there, and she falls in that category of player, and I don't think there's too many players, Sabalenka, Rybakina and Swiatek, will be actively looking at and thinking, God, I really don't want to play them. But I would hazard a guess that Ostapenko is one of those who's in that list, if there is such a list, which I'm sure there's not. It's just my mythical imagination. But I think, and the reason I say that is because while I don't think she's going to win Wimbledon, she is very good on grass. But worse, and I think worse for these three players particularly, is just how unpredictable she is. And when she's hot, she's crazy hot. She plays brilliant stuff. And I think there's a bit of a fear factor to a player like that, where you're thinking, God, if they have a bloody good day here, they actually are good enough to whack me off the court. And I might not have as much of a say in it. Now, those three are good enough to whack people off the court 9 times out of 10, and Ostapenko is probably only 4 times out of 10. But those 4 are hot and bring her up to a very high level. And so, winning a title, coming in with confidence, means she'll probably lose first round now I've said that. But I definitely will be having her in my fantasy team when that gets launched again.
I mean, she has a 3-0 head-to-head with Iga Swiatek, which I think is pretty interesting. She was the last player to beat her before she went on that big unbeaten run. I think that's because she's someone, as you say, who can get really hot and take the racket out of your hand. And
I mean, that's a really interesting head-to-head that I didn't realise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only really aware of it because she was the last person to beat her. I think she beat her in the Middle East somewhere, just before she did that 40-match unbeaten run.
What's the range of surfaces?
It's 2 hard, 1 grass. They've not played for 18 months now, so I think that would be a really good. Ostapenko is probably, if there's no pullouts, going to be ranked seeded 17th, which is interesting because it'll put her into the possibles bracket of 17 to 32 in fantasy tennis.
Just what you want, a good 17, really.
Yeah, 17 is the nut. That's the nuts. But it'll also put her into an interesting draw bracket where she will get some protection but she'll be at the top of a draw bracket, I think. So she'll be like the worst possible player in theory for someone to have in their section. So that'll be quite interesting to see. I mean, I love Jelena Ostapenko. I interviewed her last year at Eastbourne, and she was just such good value. And like she had at the time a Ukrainian coach and a Ukrainian doubles partner, and she talked a lot about how she'd kind of taken them into her home, and they'd had some time off, and they'd all gone back to Riga together, and it was just really interesting. And like I talked last week about Annette Kontaveit and how big a star she is, obviously in Estonia. Like it's kind of the same with Ostapenko in Latvia. Like it's a small country. They don't have many big like national, international sporting superstars, and Ostapenko is one of them. And I'm always interested by that mindset. If you're one of those players, I remember talking to Maria Sakkari about it. If you're one of those players from a country that doesn't have many big stars, and it's less true with Sakkari because Greece does have some big stars, what that kind of does for you going around the world, like flying your flag around the world, it must make it quite interesting in terms of like the mindset, whether it creates pressure, whether it creates great pride, I'm not sure, but interesting. And we'll see how Ostapenko goes. The other women's final today was in Berlin, where Donna Vekic lost to Petra Kvitova. Probably another one, George, who we should maybe be thinking about as a bit of a... I feel like I've barely talked about Petra Kvitova for like the last year.
Well, we actually did a little segment on her relatively recently, didn't we? Because she won a title, and we were trying to guess how many titles she's won, which I now know because it was.
It's loads, isn't it?
That was her 31st today, which
is
good bloody going. So it's a lot of titles.
I believe she is second on the active list of titles. Yeah, come on, George. You should get this. I was almost going to bring it up earlier.
Venus Williams.
It's Venus Williams, yes, who lost to Jelena Ostapenko in Birmingham this week. It is. But yeah, I mean, Petra Kvitova, two-time Wimbledon champion, ranked top 10 in the world, just won a title.
She'll go out first week. She always does this. The moment I start to think she'll do well, she'll lose first week.
All right.
But yeah, she is good. She is a good player, and she can be good on grass. But every time I can remember in recent years she's arrived into a tournament, a slam in good form, it's gone disastrously. So that is my note of caution to our fantasy players. And now she'll reach the final and Ostapenko will lose first week.
You've sort of hedged so successfully there, George. I'm not sure that the gods will know that the gods won't know how to
someone tweeted that at me the other day that I'd never actually say anything. I just refused to go, which I thought was quite astute of them.
Yeah, George manages to avoid opinions on Tennis Unfiltered. Let's move on to something that I know will draw an opinion from both of you. It's Stefanos Tsitsipas versus Nick Kyrgios. I can confirm that, given we're already an hour into this podcast, we don't have time to read the whole of Stefanos Tsitsipas' statement on the racism.
We wouldn't have had time at the start of the podcast.
The racism, no racism issue. So for people who've now seen the next lot of episodes for Breakpoint, they will already know this, that one episode features both Tsitsipas and Kyrgios talking about their row in Wimbledon last year. Kyrgios says it's not gentlemanly, that Kyrgios brings a basketball attitude to the court, that he doesn't like it. Kyrgios just says he doesn't care what people say. This was then kind of framed as a racial issue, and that there was a kind of racist undertones to what Tsitsipas was saying. He then posted a big apology, which included a slightly odd anecdote about how he understood being othered because when the Greek financial crisis happened, lots of people took the piss out of him for being Greek. Which, again, slightly... I always think if you're going to apologise for accidentally being racist, don't say, no, I've experienced struggle too. Like, don't equate them. Anyway, that's just bad comms.
It's probably a bad translation as well, but I think he's more describing xenophobia than racism.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes.
But, yeah.
Nevertheless. Calvin, what a mess, eh? Two idiots getting a fight. Who wins?
Yeah, I'm no fan of either, to be honest. But I mean, yeah. So as we discussed in our WhatsApp group, some people saying it was racist what Tsitsipas says, and it definitely wasn't racist.
Yeah.
Like, that was a nonsense. The NBA stuff, right? There was people suggesting that he'd only said NBA because Kyrgios is a man of colour. No, he said he brought an NBA attitude because he always trains in an NBA top, like all the time. He lost in the Wimbledon final last year and put a cap on that has a motif of an NBA player on the front of it. He loves basketball. He talks about basketball all the time.
He potentially plays more basketball than tennis.
Yeah, he does, right? So that's why they said it. And then there was the talk of, and it was also racist and not inclusive because he said tennis is a gentleman's game. Now, anybody who says tennis is a gentleman's game is a bit of an idiot anyway. It's just an absolute waffle, that. But that was said about McEnroe, certainly, and it was also said about Agassi as a criticism of them. And the comment doesn't become racist when the exact same thing is said about a person of colour.
Yeah,
like that. That's not how it works. And I'm sure that all the things we could label as Stefanos Tsitsipas, I'm sure that he's not racist.
Yeah,
I mean, I agree. I do agree. I mean, I have degrees of sympathy as well for kind of people looking at the language and thinking, kind of uneducated gentleman's game. There is a lot of kind of historical stuff around, people of colour being excluded from a lot of these kind of sports, and not just tennis. There, activities beyond that. So I do kind of have some sympathy that, there probably, well, there definitely is, some language that's used that is kind of dog whistle language that has developed and become more subtle, that does kind of have racial undertones. And I agree with you. I don't really think that's the case here. I want to say, actually, I've experienced this before as well. Not to this degree that I needed to put a statement out, but I wrote I did an interview with Felix Auger-Aliassime many years ago in Monte Carlo, and I had written that he was an incredibly articulate young man, and it went round on Twitter being like, he's calling him articulate because he thinks he's a black man, and therefore it's a surprise to him that he's articulate. Now, actually, in my own head, what I was thinking was, some young sportsmen are really inarticulate, and it's really bloody difficult to interview them, and that wasn't the case. And that was, so I could understand where that had come from and that perspective, but so I've definitely been on the wrong side of the fence of this sort of thing before, when I don't think I was being racist, more of a commentary of what some tennis players are like, which is dull as dishwater. But I do have kind of sympathies of how that language can be portrayed and how it can impact people. So
and there's no question that there is a lot of unconscious bias in sports reporting. A friend of mine did a dissertation on it about how certain adjectives are always used about certain ethnicities, essentially, in football match reports, and that does happen. But I think that, and I don't want to gatekeep raciality, but some people shouldn't be allowed to call things racist, because I think that when you throw the term around for things that are patently not racist or patently not to do with prejudice, you massively devalue the word and actually make it much harder to call out actual racism or actual sexism or actual prejudices. But yeah, I mean, look, it's sometimes I kind of value it when that's happened to me as well, George. I can't remember. I mean, it's happened several times when people have said, you're only saying this because of that. And actually, it's quite valuable to re-examine the language you're using and be like, oh, is it? And then you can come to the conclusion and go, no, it's not.
Yeah.
But it's quite valuable to go through that process and maybe go, oh, well, maybe, and sometimes maybe you do need a bit of self-reflection. And, I'm sure that goes on. And Kyrgios, actually, to come back to the issue at hand, Kyrgios did say, I know you didn't mean anything by it, mate, and sort of tried to...
I mean, he did mean something by it. He meant you're a twat, which is fine. That's okay. That is definitely what he meant by it. I think this guy's absolutely a twat, and that's fine. But it's not. I think he's a twat because he's a person of colour, or I'm fairly sure that's not the case. I have to say, I was quite surprised Tsitsipas actually released a statement on this. I think that made it inevitably more fan to the flame. It doesn't get reported as a story really in a mainstream outlet, unless one of these two comments on it. It was quite niche Twitter stuff, and I think I sent you guys the post maybe a couple of hours before the statements, and it hadn't got that much traction outside kind of the tennis bubble. And within the statement, I mean, you really had your head in your hands, just thinking, don't compare it to the Greek financial crash and people talking about Greeks. Don't do it. What are you doing? This is not a good statement. Who's advised you on this? Please don't do it. So my advice to sports people in the crisis, while it is right to apologise for certain things, think carefully about your statements and don't necessarily give one. It's hard to report on things if these people don't actually comment on it in the first place. And I think this is probably a good example of where this one was blown further out of proportion, even though, I can understand why he'd want to kind of, play that down and defend his corner.
The best part about Tsitsipas' statement was just his burning desire that his message found us well. That is a phenomenal start from a statement. Started like an email. Who starts a statement with "I hope this finds you well"? What a weirdo he is! A complete weirdo.
Yeah, absolute nut job. Speaking of absolute nut jobs, Alexander Bublik won a title today, beat Andrey Rublev in the final at Halle. Does anyone have anything they want to say about how dangerous Alexander Bublik could be at Wimbledon?
Not very. He won't make the second week.
Yeah, I'm afraid I probably agree, and that's no comment on his game, which is fantastic when he can be asked. But he probably won't be. That's the reality. But
I heard though that
it'd be fun if he did go for it and did well.
I heard that if Rublev would have won that, he would have been the first person ever to win a ATP 500 on clay, hard, and grass in the same year.
Wow,
that's a good start.
I was talking with Luke on the way to Eastbourne yesterday, and we were saying that's very surprising. It is until you consider that Queen's was only made a 500 a couple of years ago.
Right.
Is that the same with Halle?
And I think Halle was always a 500, maybe.
Or certainly Federer would have done it then, wouldn't he, really? I mean,
I thought Nadal would have done it.
Actually, I'll tell you why Federer wouldn't have done it. He probably doesn't play Barcelona that much.
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to look at the schedule in that, what 500s would they have played? Djokovic tends not to play many of the
Well, he doesn't play the grass.
The grass one, although he's won Queens, hasn't he? But has he won Queens?
I'm not
I think he has won. I think he has won it once.
He lost to Cilic, didn't he, in that final a few years ago, and I think he lost one. Maybe he did.
But it's quite an interesting. I thought it was quite an interesting start, that.
Well, the king of the 250s has become the king of the 500s, Andrey Rublev.
Well, that's signs of progress.
Very generous, George. Right. I wanted to move on to one thing that kind of we'll just sort of note it, and we can talk about it if you want, but it connects to a conversation that Calvin and I had last week, where a listener asked, is tennis for sale? And we both fairly... pretty much said yes. And sure enough, a week later, a story breaks that ATP chair Andrea Gaudenzi has held talks with the Public Investment Fund, the Saudi state-controlled sports washing vehicle, for want of a better phrase. And he said they were positive and that they didn't want to rip up tennis and tear it apart, but, that there were ways and means of having the Saudis invest in tennis. Carlos Alcaraz was then asked about this after the Queen's final. He said about Saudi Arabians getting more involved in tennis, and he said, I think they have the power to have a lot of tournaments. I've never played a tournament or an official tournament over there, but let's see how it's going to be in the future. I've no doubts I'll play over there in the future. George, I don't know if you want to celebrate Calvin being right about something. I've done it far too much lately.
Always. Calvin's getting far too much praise in these reviews and things he doesn't
I agree.
Need battering him up any further. Djokovic hasn't won Queens, by the way. He's got 2 final defeats just for the...
Sod off, Calvin.
So there you go. So he got that wrong. So that's fine. I was right there. I thought Alcaraz's comments were quite measured and fair, really. I don't think he was kind of saying, oh, I'm going to go to Saudi Arabia and take the dollar. It was definitely more like, yeah, I think they're going to get into the tour. I think, and that seems to be what is happening. I mean, it's no great surprise, is it? But I find it quite funny that we're potentially moving with Saudi Arabia from the conversation we've had over the last maybe 6 years or so since this became a bit of a thing in tennis. So, it was Djokovic and Nadal going to Saudi Arabia to play a £1 million match that Nadal then eventually wisely didn't play because of injury, and that kind of got them both off the hook. But they were getting a lot of crap for that. Norrie, we obviously ripped into quite a lot when he was going. But the conversation is moving from players choosing a kind of one-off exhibition match to, is the sport going to choose to put them there and kind of strike the deal itself? And then it becomes a bit more of a question about tennis's morality rather than kind of individual, what you'd perceive as greed. So it's probably a bit of a get out for those of them who do really want a big payday, which they'll get out there. But I think that's quite an interesting change of dynamic anyway, at least to me.
Well, I think the reality here, when you look at the golf situation, and the reason, so basically, I had this conversation with someone the other day. Basically, the young guys, the guys between 100 and 200, or young or old, will all get a pretty significant uplift on the money. Like, if it were to go the way of Liv, not that it will, but if it were to, they would get a pretty significant uplift on the money that they make. And as discussed, it can be a grind down there, and no one really begrudges them that. But the tour doesn't work. The tour needs those people because it needs bulk, basically. It needs fodder, and Live Golf needs that, and there are a lot of guys in the same situation. But it also needs star names, and let's face it, those star names don't need another $10 million. And so they're the people who really hold all the power in this situation. If Djokovic and Medvedev and Nadal and the top 10 say no, then it's well, actually, this doesn't work.
I think that's the interesting dynamic here, really, for tennis, is that the biggest star that's going to be left in the men's game, because I'm discounting Nadal now because I think he's finished, just to wind up our Nadal.
Well, I mean, he is retiring.
The biggest star would say yes. He's openly admitted he'd say yes. He's talked about, I'm sure slightly tongue-in-cheek, but, moving Wimbledon to Saudi Arabia or to the UAE. So Djokovic definitely would take the money and go. And I don't think he'd be alone, to be honest.
And
I think people would.
And let's face it, tennis needs the money.
Tennis does need the money. I mean, it's a really interesting one because you've got this whole player faction, the PTPA, essentially, who will likely actively encourage this, really. They think tennis isn't being paid well enough compared to other sports. The money is there to potentially make that happen. I would caution, at a note of caution, that it'll be interesting to see how sustainable this money is in the long run. I know there's a lot of it kind of flying into sport at the minute, but it'll be interesting to see how long that actually remains the case in the long term. They're not the first petro-state to try this sort of thing, or big, powerful nation to start bankrolling things and then suddenly lose interest and it all goes up in flames. So that's always worth considering. But I think there'd be strong support, to be honest, from the player body. And I do always think, would I necessarily turn it down? I don't know. I'm not sure I would. It's a difficult minefield.
The thing is, if you offered to quadruple my salary, that's life-changing. If you offer to quadruple Novak Djokovic's salary, that's not life-changing. Realistically, doesn't really change his life.
Could get him a yacht.
Well, does he not already have a yacht? Does he not already have a yacht?
He might have a yacht. Yeah, I'm sure.
He's made $150 million, plus whatever he's made outside of tennis. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by a moth. Does he really need all that more money? I mean, whereas Calvin, if either of your players got offered a guaranteed amount of money that was 4 times last year's earnings, I don't think any of us would begrudge them saying yes. Do you think they would?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that's the difference. And it was the same. I said on the podcast last week, I had this debate with some of the players and other coaches, and I think it just comes down to greed. If Djokovic is pushing for it, then it's just greed, and he will push for it because he's greedy. That's what I've said before. That's what the whole PTPA thing is. It's not no tennis players union or anything. It's set up by Djokovic to get more money for him. That's what it's there for. Under the guise of other things, but they don't really seem to be pushing on anything else. But I mean, I think it's a sad state of affairs. I think, the whole football is getting to be a sad state of affairs because of it, and tennis and other sports will go there. They'll come for the next sport. Basketball will be next, or cricket, or something.
No, they're already all after cricket. Saudi Premier League is on its way, I assure you.
And I mean, it comes down to that. Yeah, if it's life changing, then people are probably going to do it. But that doesn't mean everybody is. Some people might not want to take money off people who kill people and chop up journalists using a bone saw. But some
and
people,
all the other. By the way, I mean, this isn't the Human Rights Unfiltered podcast. Although
it's been an odd podcast today.
Yeah, well, frankly, it's one of the few things we haven't talked about today. But if people want to,
I'm sure as well what we'll hear from the defenders. No, it's not Saudi. It's the Public Investment Fund. It's not the Saudi state. It's definitely not the Saudi state. It's like that's saying that you don't own your own house. It's just the person's investment fund that does. It's just the biggest load of nonsense that Newcastle fans ploughed it out, and I'm sure some golfers have ploughed it out. And
no doubt. It seems like quite a depressing note to end on, George. So I'm going to rely on you to bring us some light.
Well. The only other thing I had down, I know we've done a lot about wildcards, but I enjoyed Calvin's reflections on Mallorca, which might be a mildly amusing finish.
Calvin, Mallorca wildcards? I see Stefano Tsitsipas.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's just so bent, isn't it? It's just absolutely like, why is Petros Tsitsipas go? I know the lad he's playing with. The lad he's playing with is a very good player, Bart Stevens, but I don't know why Bart's getting a wildcard into a tournament in Mallorca. He's good player. He's better than Petros, but Petros is not a decent player as well. But just nuts. Like what? Why? So it's now like the Tsitsipas. It's ridiculous when they play together and get one. And it's definitely like Stefanos has said, I will play with Feli Lopez if you give my brother a wild card as well with any one of his choosing. Yeah. So it's now we're just giving both of the ball. And why? Wait a minute. Why is he really worth that? Stefanos Tsitsipas? Is it worth it to get him at your tournament? It's not like he's not a massive star or anything. No one cares, do they?
He's a big enough star, I think, probably. I mean, people are going to go to that tournament anyway. It's quite well attended, isn't it? But
yeah, but it's just, it's just, again, like, I mean, tennis doesn't help itself with stuff like that. It's just nonsense.
Indeed. All right, well, thanks for that bit of like, oh, George, you found something happy to end on.
Well, I think this is the happiest news of the day, but I did sort of mention it earlier, but you should also be really excited that fantasy tennis is going to be back soon.
Yeah, why not? Me and my broken finger are going to program another spreadsheet. That will open a couple of hours after the draw. The draw is 10 o'clock on Friday morning. Excitingly, the Wimbledon draw is going to be streamed on TV for the first time. It's usually just streamed by radio, which is an incredibly frustrating way to absorb it, I assure you. But
do you not go?
Yeah,
it's quite a fun one to go and sit in the room and do, actually, compared to a lot of the other draws.
Although this year I think I'm going to be at Hurlingham, but yes. So we shall open that up a couple of hours after the draw. You'll have until Monday morning to get your team in. Usual rules apply, 10 players, 5 from each draw. It's very simple. You just have to fill out the form. I'll post it all over various places. We'll do a preview podcast after the draw as well. We'll try and give you some tips. And then the Grand Slam will be here, and there'll be daily podcasts. And by popular demand, I will try not to do all of them on my own. And I will get the other lads involved because several people have become very bored with the sound of my voice. As have I.
I like him. I think you do as the only other person on this pod who's had to do a one-person podcast, I can assure you it ain't very easy, and you're very good at it, James. So I will back you to the hilt over that.
Thanks, George. That's all we've got time for. Please do come back next week.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Social Podcast Network.